Hello beloveds, my name is Evonne from Embody Mother and welcome to the cycle report for the 24th of April 2019. I come to you from Dja Dja Wurrung country in Central Highlands, Victoria, Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. So we are 2 weeks away from Samhain, and so really feeling the going deep into the deep descent. So what's been arising for me this week and what I've seen evidence of around is the death process and how do we do the death process. If you've been following me for quite a while, you've noticed over the last few weeks we've sort of spoken about that last bit of the letting go of the banshee, of the moving away from the shallow waters into the depths, so we can really step into our fully human selves and finding out what we're made of. And it has really struck me this week about, that letting go process of what's familiar and comfortable, but not really serving us. And how do we let go of that, whether it be relationships, jobs, where we live, anything that requires us to step out of our comfort zone and move to the deep water, knowing that it's going to be, fully what we need and what's going to serve us. But, to hold on to things that are familiar and comfortable is such a big thing. So something that I've been reflecting on this week is how have I done my death processes. I'm really familiar with my birth processes. I've had 4 babies. I've really dived deep into my birth process, my own birth stories. But my death process is still something that I am diving into. So it's a really interesting thing to just sit back and say, so, how do I do death? It feels like, for me personally, it feels like quite a long drawn out process of, is this right? Is this not? And, how I do get stuck in what's familiar with me, even though it might not be serving me. But I know that once I've made a decision on, yep, I'm going to go, and off I go. And that for me is letting go and the death and the dying and moving into the place that I'm familiar, but knowing that it's for my highest good. So one of the reflective questions I would invite you to think of this week would be, how do you do death? What's your death process? What's been the death process of family members and people that you know? And it's something in our culture that we don't talk about very often because people are really afraid of it and, like to cling on to things that are familiar even though they're not serving. So, I think we need to talk about death, and we need to talk about, how can we hold that for ourselves and others, whether it's through a physical death or an emotional death or, just a transitional point. Is it really death anyway? I mean, is it just letting go and welcoming the next thing? Because, the thing about learning about these cycles is that, it is a cycle and it's a circle, and circles never end. And so, our relationship with the word death, I think that everything is ending is actually not true. It's a myth. It just is something that we just move into a next phase. We just leave something, we let go, and we move in, onto the next places. And it's something that we all have to do. There is points of rite of passage throughout our lifespan, whether it be from our own birth, birth and death is the same. You're moving from a place of comfort and familiarity to moving into a place that's not so familiar, but we know that we need to go. So birth is, it's a death also. Menarche, when as women first bleed, and men, as the boys moving into the men phase, a young man through, wet dreams and things like that. It's a transition point. It's a rite of passage. It's letting go of, that child in us and moving into that adolescent of us. And the next phase, moving into that you know, moving into mother and fatherhood, you know, it requires a death. And this is probably one of the biggest things I've sat in, especially through the birth of my children, is that, you know, to become a mother and a father, there actually needs to be a death of the maiden and the young man in us. Otherwise, we are still trying to capture that maiden essence through other ways, and it's not actually it's a really hard place to be, you know, and trying to not fully open and be ready for the next phase, but still holding on and just, you know, wanting to hang on to the phase that's already past us, that we need to keep moving, because, you know, life is a cycle and it just keeps going and going whether we're ready for it or not. So, you know, I guess, and then, you know, and then there's menopause. You know, we spoke a little about menopause at autumn equinox, and now we're in the death process, and it's like, well, you know, what's our relationship with death? What's actually the meaning of the word death? You know, and you know, these words and you know, these ideas keep flowing in me, and just like, what we really need to talk about this as a culture, and maybe change the perception of the word death, I think. I know there's movement around with an up and growing industry with the death doulas and natural funerals and things like that, which is so awesome to see, which really, you know, treats death as just another transition point, like birth, like menopause, like, you know, menarche, you know, mothering, and it's just another point on the wheel that we need to, you know, become familiar with and know our processes of, so we can move through and move into be, you know, a full expression of ourselves, and letting go of all that no longer serves us, because we sort of have, that's what we're here for, you know, the expansion. And the moment that we hang on to something that's not really serving us, but we're not wanting to let go because of the familiarity, you know, again, you know, it feels like it's just pushing down emotions and suppressing, and, you know, we can get really sick, and, you know, all sorts of things start to happen to our bodies because we're not fully letting go and expressing our fullness of being a human. So that is Samhain for me at this moment. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about ancestors as we move into the actual Samhain ness, but something to consider. With the moon cycle, so we are now at a waning gibbous or disseminating moon. So our full moon was on Friday. So for me that was such an intense period. And coupled with, it felt like a full illumination of what needs to be let go of. So it was like that full moon with the, you know, waning, deep waning earth cycle, and just watching it all, just here it is, this is what needs to let go of. And just, I've had some really straight conversations of like, what is going on, you know, really clear, wanting and needing clarity for, you know, they're talking about the death. And then, so then we have our third quarter moon this Saturday, and then the following week, next Sunday week will be the dark moon. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. And I am on day 4-5. So it's been really interesting. I started bleeding again mid-cycle on the full moon, which had its own other level of intensity of the letting go and the full illumination of what needs to let go of. So that's been really, really big for me. And being day 5 now, I'm feeling a little bit more grounded in my body. But it came with such big insights and, really a mass intensity of epicness of the full moon on a disseminating earth cycle and, you know, bleeding. It was really big, but really trusting that's exactly what needed to happen for me to move through what I needed to move through on this weekend that just passed. So that is that. It's been really, really big. So, as I sort of spoke a little bit about before, the reflective red tank questions: what's your death process? You know, how do you do death? How do you let go of things? And what's your idea of death? You know, what's your perception of death? Is it, you know, how can we change the idea around death is actually an ending, as versus, you know, death is just another part of the cycle that just continues to go through. And how can we, you know, sit with that and maybe educate others about the death process? Just a couple of things. I am so excited that I'm taking on people from deep soul journeying, starting from last week. So I'm taking bookings now, and I've got 3 more spaces. So if you're interested, email me and I'll send you all the details. It's a 12-week journey with me. We move through our birth processes, to sacred wound, to looking at our lover selves, how we birth things, so our mother phase, whether you're a mother or not. We look at our superpower and to the Marga phase, and we also talk about our ancestors, and we look at our death process, and then we look at, you know, the wild unknown and how we sit in that. So if this sounds like a journey for you, my details are below. Feel free to email me and I will send you heaps of details. So I'm super excited. I'm also hosting a circle, online Zoom circle, which is by donation, on the first Monday of every month. So details also are below for that, and it'd be so great to sit in circle on Zoom. How awesome is technology that we can be anywhere and still hold circle and space for ourselves and each other. So if any of that resonates with you and you hear that calling, just email me below, and all the details will come to you. So from my heart to your heart, I truly hope that you feel deeply held and deeply loved, as you truly are. You really are. And if you don't feel it, your ancestors are there, the earth is there, all the non-humanness, and that's just a non-human, that's not including all the humans around you that love you so much. So if you're not feeling that today, tap into that, feel it, because it is real and it's true. So my love for you. Thank you for listening.